So Carter Dunbar is normally with us. He's not with us today. So I'm going to go over some data, including a survey that the Learning Council did just recently, a big national one that was run in January. It's pretty interesting stuff. All right, so I'm LeiLani Cauthen. I'm just sharing on behalf of Identity Automation right now. So basically, they've come in and started to have lots of conversations about what's called sovereign identity and how that can be the new architecture point for actually getting to, full personalization for students. So there's a lot of discussion about this, hybrid learning, what is the real end point of where this is all going? And right now, a lot of districts are just, rosters are sort of like, what class are you in and what teacher are you assigned to, grade and class structure. But there's a future coming with sovereign identity, and Identity Automation, again, is the company talking about this a lot, where a lot more tags accumulate to the individual student in the data sets. So, maybe they like unicorns and not monsters, and maybe they like red versus blue or yellow versus purple. So what they like and what their preferences are, including their learning abilities and disabilities, will be accumulating to that individual identity. Now, that's not that very different from the way the internet kind of knows you. When you go shopping, it suddenly starts showing you lots of ads that are just, things that you've been shopping for. That kind of functionality has been missing from most education systems because the individual identity itself doesn't accrue more metrics around itself. So let me kind of show you some of the reasons why this is becoming so important right now. The survey that we did in January had about a split percentages from what were the teachers responding versus the administrators responding. And this is the data that came out of it all. So essentially, 35% of students aren't showing up online. This has been a really big problem for a lot of schools where they were trying to deliver the same sort of class structure as they'd had in brick and mortar, doing it all with video conferencing. And when they did that, 35% of kids were not showing up, or maybe they were showing up once in a great while, but not other times. Some of them were places where the older students were having to take care of their younger siblings, so they were just neglecting school. Another statistic is that 15% of the students sometimes have the wrong materials distributed to them. And I'm hoping Tim Biegman will pipe up about this, because this gets pretty important, that you have a system in place that allows easy dissemination of materials, both like what Safari Montage is doing with a full repository, but also like what single sign-on does that ClassLink talked about, and Identity Automation is talking about now at another sort of dimension to it. So students who can't easily navigate online, that came in at 34%. Of course, a lot of students and their parents were getting thrown in quickly, and that was a real issue. So over the last year, there's been a tremendous amount of training just to teach people how to navigate digital systems. And then 15% of students have opted out completely from re-enrollment because the offerings that they were getting just weren't working for them, or there was some other reason. This is a really high number in addition to the numbers of opt-outs that were already happening in the market. And I'm going to quantify this later when I talk about hybrid logistics. 51% of students have achievement loss. That's why all of the companies that sponsor the Learning Council right now are talking about this. What solution can they bring to bear on this? And most superintendents are very, very aware of this, and setting up things like summer camps, and remedial, everything sort of to try to catch up kids right now. Teachers who can't easily navigate and use online systems or apps and need more training, still at 30%, despite the massive amount of PD done. I don't think this will ever really be done, because the accumulation of the identity to the teacher about what they've done and what they don't need to redo, and how professional development itself needs to sort of be atomized into bits that you can bite off as you need them, has not really been done everywhere, and it needs to be done. So that sort of little mini revolution is coming. And I think Mobile Mind is going to talk a lot about that. So unable to easily personalize learning for students in the changed condition, 47% saying they're not able to really do that. And that's really also why structure of how you're delivering learning, is it all lecture centric, or are you providing materials in an asynchronous way so that they can be personalized more easily? That's the real big question. And then teachers being, this is a big one for me, teachers being overly sidetracked into repetitive distribution and collection of assignments, resources, or communications. 40% say they're sidetracked. This is a really interesting dynamic that we didn't see when we had physical classrooms, because, you know, when you were in a physical classroom, teacher would write on the board the link you're supposed to go to, or tell you what your next assignment is, or pass out pieces of paper that the kids in the front row would pass to the back or pass around the room. Distribution was fairly easy. And then when you had assignments, kids would come in with a piece of paper and just lay it on your desk. Now it's email traffic, or it's traffic in 16 different systems you have to go check in all the dashboards. A lot of principals have been telling us, you know, I'm a dashboard checker all day. This is a very interesting sort of dynamic. But this traffic issue is a big one for Learning Counsel. We're paying a lot of attention to it and how that can be reduced. The percentage of teachers who are feeling overwhelmed or burnt out, 74%. This is the cause for a lot of the retirements. It's also a cause for a lot of teachers in the principal's office or superintendent's officers crying. It's not a fun moment. So normally what you would think is, okay, we need to scale back. Let's not put so much technology on them. Actually, probably the way out is the way through. Getting through to the other side of a much more sophisticated software architecture, along with sovereign identity and your repositories and everything else that you need, so that the burden can come off of teachers and make it a lot easier. They don't need to be doing all this searching around and building around of all their lesson plans. They can buy things that are already automated, learning modules in a gamified way. They can find content that's already been vetted in digital repositories. There's a much easier way to do this rather than burning out your teachers. So that's my little conversation I wanted to give you around what's really happening with, you know, all of the things going on around this new idea, sovereign identity. So if there's any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move on and start this next conversation about hybrid logistics. So be prepared with your questions and asks as I'm walking through this next set of material. All right, again, I want to just do a shout out for anybody that's just recently joined us. Thanks to all of our sponsors that are with us. And then let me give you the data on where we're at. Nationally, in 2019, we cited the numbers of opt-out. This has an effect on hybrid logistics at 27%. It was already huge. So charters are included in public education. So, but they're a different sort of schema most of the time, and some of them are doing really interesting online things. This was already a really big number, and then the pandemic happened. So the major shift in 2020 is we jumped up to 33.6%. That's the very conservative number. If we go to that January study that I just shared with you, the national average is more closer to 15%. Then we're more like 42% have opted out. Like, wow. A lot of that charters, private schools, but the biggest gainer was homeschool by a mile. Part of what happened was parents and grandparents, even students, were shopping online as soon as the shutdown happened. There was a big uptick in app purchase on the consumer markets. So that, tick up really was an effect on people finding that, oh, there's a whole association with homeschool curriculum, and I just need to buy a subscription and I can do this all myself. There's even instructions. So those sorts of companies really aren't known to the public sector. They don't market to the public sector. They're straight up consumer offerings. So this is part of what's really happening. If you were losing anywhere between that 3.6% of the earlier 2020 study and the 15% that some districts think is temporary, that they're going to get some of the kids back when they're fully back on, although that hasn't been happening in Texas. So for example, Dallas ISD had lost 15% of their students and they weren't coming back. Maybe a few of them, but not anywhere near what they were expecting. Then what you're dealing with is a loss of revenue, usually huge losses of revenue, unless you're Oregon, then they just redistribute it. But you have a situation where literally this is knocking at your door and you're saying, I don't know if we can be normal anymore. Normal may need to not come back because look at what's happening. People want options. People want sort of an extreme flexibility, and we're not offering that. We're the same structure we were 200 years ago with a manufacturing model that just sort of, class and grade structures people through. And really, we don't want to do that anymore. Maybe that is the inequity that we really need to address, is that we're structured so that there's a supposed to be sort of commonality we teach to the middle for every kid, and that's not working for too many kids. All right, so there's still a situation in America where parents are still afraid and won't come back. That's about 20% of the population that's still attached to traditional public schools that don't want to be physically in the building. And then you have a huge number who want normal back. And that is going to be another pressure point that executives have to make a decision on. Where's the biggest pressure? How do we deal with this? Now, I do want to comment, because we always found this on the road. The parents with the most pressure for normal, they really want normal, exactly, with textbooks and paper. That's normally in the wealthier districts. And the reason that we found is that those parents simply say, I succeeded in life and I want the exact same thing for my kid. And you got to give a little pushback on that, because it may not be the best thing for the kids. So we're in the middle of what we like to call as Learning Counsel space and time revision. So I want to take you out of the classroom, up into the administration view of what's really happening in education. So I'm going to go over the space side first. So Carrie mentioned today, they have one-way hallways. So that sectioning of buildings and entrances is a common thing now. It may be common forever because it reduces transmission and the potentiality of infection rate across your campuses. So you may partition buildings. You may also have alternating building use by different subgroups, so that you can disinfect overnight, and then a new group comes in, and maybe they're Tuesdays and Thursdays one week, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday another week, and then they alternate with another group. So there's also this idea of house rooms, commons rooms, like Lammersville ISD uses. A lot of charters use this because they're smaller. So they have like a big main room, they call it the house or the commons or the home room. And then they only use meeting space, classrooms as needed. So those are sort of scheduled on the schedule when there's a decision. Okay, that now there's a point of a lecture. Now we go over here, and then everybody studies asynchronously. So they can be in the building or remote. It won't matter, because most of the time they're in a common space. So there's also the social distancing thing, which is sort of wrecking planning for a lot of schools right now. We're hearing this all over the country, because you can only have physically so many in the room, and you don't have enough rooms. So some places have decided that their middle schools are going to do that alternating schedule, and the high schools are just going to always be remote, which is kind of wild. Then you also have in California this micro school concept where they're taking over retail space so that they can micro school. In other words, instead of the aggregation movement that we've had for the last 50, 60 years of, bigger and bigger high schools, and everybody comes together and they're bused from further away. Instead, now it's disaggregating into smaller sort of subset groups. There's also the parents over development movement, where parents maybe convert a garage in 4 or 5 families, sort of micro school in their garage. And then in terms of time, this is where it gets really wild. We watched in spring, people try to show us, the state level of New York had like 6 different models, AB days, AB weeks, going from a 45-minute Carnegie unit to 120 minutes. But if you're a teacher, you can only use 20 minutes of that 120 for video conferencing. The rest has to be asynchronous. So you better line it all up throughout everybody's lesson plans. And then they still didn't know when they were going to open, if at all. And so they were, doing all this weird stuff. So then you also have things like staggered starts, like you can start this week, but not that week. And then this, like I said, altered daily block schedules that are wild. And then you have this last thing, which has happened first within subject-specific software of auto-cohorting and calendaring by pace. We like to think of that, that's real hybrid logistics. It's that the terminology Learning Counsel came up with. It's also sort of known as Uberization of learning. So maybe you're in a homeroom or commons room most of the time, but then all of a sudden your calendar gives you a pop-up and it says, hey, so you are due at classroom 1B at 10:30 in the morning for your math lecture, because you're in a cohort. The cohort just filled to its capacity, and we just triggered the lecture that's in your path. In the meanwhile, you were studying other stuff because you were waiting for that lecture to happen. So this logistics technology is, we think, one of the biggest revolutions coming in education. So the impact on teachers in terms of shifting space and time has been really debilitating for a lot of teachers, because some of them are having to teach from home because maybe they're in a category that is really iffy for exposure to COVID from a health perspective. Some are in the classrooms and they're teaching the classes on campus, but maybe over here, they're also doing video at the same time, like Carrie was showing us. This is hard. If you don't also own those cameras that watch you as you move around the room, you're going off camera, and then the kids at home can't see you, and maybe they can't even hear you because you're too far away from the audio. It's kind of a wild moment. Some schools have done what's called frontline and backline teaching because they didn't have devices. They did a med scramble and got devices, and then they didn't have any lesson plans done. They maybe didn't have even a repository with stuff that's been pre-vetted. So they said, okay, somebody's going to be on the front line and do sort of things that we know we can do sort of on the lesson plan and social emotional leadership and just getting people together. In the meantime, we're going to take the other math teachers and put them in the back line, laying all the bricks of getting all the lesson plans done. A lot of that happened. And some schools have said now, this really worked. We really like this. We're going to keep doing this. We're going to have teaching teams, and it's going to be awesome. There's also some teachers that have been assigned to rove to certain neighborhoods only. And then there's been the impact of direct instruction on demand learning. So one of the number one technologies, I think it was the fourth highest from the top, esports was number one, of our national survey, was chatbots and on-demand answers, either live or chatbot form. Hard to do chatbot if you don't have full lesson sequence already pre-built with all the possible questions so that a person can just do the question and answer online. So teachers were having to answer phones, 10:30 at night. Some kid needs some help with homework. That's not working. In fact, T-Mobile even has an agenda right now to talk to schools about teachers having a second phone, so they can leave their personal phone on if grandma calls, but their school phone can be shut off after hours, so they're not on all the time. There were some superintendents who were having to order their teachers, turn your phone off. You're not supposed to be working 24/7. You need to be off sometimes. Teachers are so valiant. They were like, okay, I'll give you all this, and then I'll do it all. Work all day. So that other technology forthcoming is that purchase of secondary services, outside teachers that are answerers in the evenings, or chatbots. So one of the things that happened as we rounded in the pandemic, and we think this is going to stick permanently, is that you have to realize, like Kurt Madden did from Fresno Unified, good friend of mine, he just retired. There's not a captive audience anymore for you. You don't have a guaranteed set of students anymore. So the teacher, according to Fresno, really needed to move their thinking, and this is a biggie, to being a coach or mentor. If they're still thinking they're a lecturer all the time, that's a mistake. Lecture is a very inefficient way to deliver. There's some places that want you to keep, some schools, so you still got a lecture and you don't even get to video your lecture because that's not allowed, because it might have some of the kids on the video, although I think there's technologies now where you can remove all the kids on the video and just have the lecture of the teacher, so that can be reusable lecture. But that's a big deal. Because that modality is teaching to the middle. It's the common ground. And the move towards full personalization is the competitive move. And that's going to sort of change that mode. So they also decided that their curriculum had to work in all three of those modes: traditional with PPE, masks, social distancing, sometimes plexiglass, and then the blended campus remote. And then some kids are just going to be home all the time. They're not going to come in. Or maybe they only want to be on the football team and come in for the art labs and science labs. That's a complete restructure of how you deliver, and it redefines hybrid. All right, so I want to show you this sort of eye chart. I got a couple of really interesting eye charts for you just to blow your mind. Ask me about this, because this is the Learning Council's hybrid model architecture for personalized learning. It's a structure for you to think with all the things that are technology in your world. And there are more in the K-12 world than literally any other market. Certainly manufacturing and healthcare and even higher ed do not deal with the sheer level of complexity that K-12 does. It's just majestic. So over here in the orange boxes, you have all your hardware stuff and your networking stuff. And then in the blue boxes at the top, sort of your face out to the outside world, is your portals, your paywalls. Then you're going to start thinking about this new thing, hybrid logistics, and then this other new thing, sovereign identity, and into access management, which is single sign-on. Then you got your other sort of invisible layers, which are your security layers. And then these wonderful things, the learning object repositories, your data warehouse, where all of your main systems sit, a lot of valuable content that allows you to easily drag and drop and do lesson planning. And then you got analytics and other middleware sits between other systems to do integrations and that kind of thing. You might even have outside services, independent contractors like those chatbots or online teaching to service students at night. And then you got to integrate all that stuff. And that now gets really complicated below that window. You've got software systems of your major systems in the green boxes, student information systems, learning management systems, grading, badging systems, testing systems, facilities management, professional development, financial, office, and your office suites, your Google or your Microsoft. Those things in terms of workflow and routing are weak between themselves and these other things, which are all the app market things, subscription sites like Scholastic or BrainPop and all the other companies in that space, mini apps that are calculator apps. They might even be like $100 a year, but there's purchase of them. And they're sort of stair-stepping themselves. Like there's maybe 1,000 in grade 3, 2,000 in grade 4. By the time you get to the upper grades, it's majestic numbers. You might have 4,000 to 7,000 apps in any medium-sized district. When you get to the big ones, like Houston IC, they have over 2 million digital learning objects. It's just huge. So the discussion now, let me walk you through this, is that's nice. We have like a bajillion things to learn and there's really a lot of choice, but it's like, can we automate this somehow? So the conversation is up there in the upper corner. How do we auto cohort kids to pace them through autonomously and asynchronously in some instances, but then also auto distribute the resources and then also make sure there's still live teaching intersection. In other words, we flip our mindset and we say, hey, why are we always constructed around the classroom when physical attendance is sort of iffy in many instances? Why don't we physically restructure so that when there's a lecture necessary, when there's a necessary moment of leadership for teaching, it's like Uber, it's intersection on demand. Then we take the teacher time and focus it on who's slow on the pathway so that every student succeeds and every student gets the attention they need. So that's what's really being talked about. And really, this is complex. This is an amazingly complex map. I just feel for all educators, they've been trying to think their way through all of this stuff. And some places, unfortunately, have been oversimplifying it. They're trying to just Google Docs their way to glory or Google Classroom. It's not fully robust. It maybe doesn't even sync with other things. It makes it for a lot of traffic on the teacher. And love Google, but that's not going to work for a very robust and changed model of execution for learning. So people always bring up screen learning, like how much is enough and are we overwhelming people? There was a study, we'll cite it again. We've cited this many times. The optimum is 4.5 hours per day. This is the largest study ever done. It's kind of, it's wrapped it up for me. I don't need any more data than this. But the ratios need to be thought through. So the amount you should take in a school day of straight up ingestion, like I'm just pulling, reading, watching a video, I'm watching a lecture, really is only about 2.5 hours a day you should use. Because you should leave 2 hours for personal screen use outside of school. I mean, I grew up in the generation where we all had 4 to 5, 6, maybe 6 hours of TV, and that was normal. The other 60% of the time in the school day should be, it can still be on screen, but it should be active. You should be gaming math or gaming reading with, drag and drop words. Did I get the pronunciation right? That kind of thing. Or you're writing your own essay, or you're interacting in small groups with other kids, but it's active, not passive. So really the difference is 40% screen learning that's passive versus 60% active or anything else, physical, hands-on, anything. All right, so the big questions right now are, how are you using space? How are you using people? And are you elevating the premium that you have, which is your human intersection point? Or are you making the humans do everything? Where they're literally still classroom discipline on everything and they're figuring out all the lesson plans and you're just overwhelming them. You need to think about workflow. Logistics is your friend. And time. How are you really using time most successfully? So these are the big questions. So the problems are obviously, like I already talked about, that teacher who's doing live teaching plus virtual teaching is new. Some people do it brilliantly. Others, it's too much to put your attention on at once. So then they're also having to distribute and collect assignments to every single student, manage which resources have access and closing access to others, and then managing all the individual communications. This is like thousands of emails a day, especially for the elementary and some of the middle schools. And then meanwhile, all that's happening. You have teacher having to interact with other teachers and management, but also parents. So that's all been happening at once. That's a lot of traffic. So this is another eye chart for you to sort of think through. So let's say you were going to personalize learning on one subject as a teacher, and you took the Johnny and gave him certain resources over time, and then Isabella, and then maybe that was too much to individualize for all your 40 kids. So you just group them, group 1, group 2, group 3. Still, individualizing for those groups is a lot of disparity in which resources and what it is that you're teaching, and it sort of throws whole group out the window. This is like air traffic control. It's too much. And it's not a human job to do this. That is where logistics is coming in. Because the definition of personalization isn't necessarily tweaking the same lesson that you've built for all 30 kids to fit that one kid only. It's different resources for different kids. So changing the basic organizing principles where the United States and probably the world sits right now. We came from the bureaucratic manufacturing model, which was like a pyramid where the students were at the bottom of grades, classes, courses. And we sacrificed because we taught to the middle. So the kids that were at the losing end of that, they just somehow didn't understand fractions and it ruined them for algebra later and everything else they could possibly try to grasp with math. They can't be fixed. They're triaged out, or they're paid less attention to, and they just keep getting poor grades. Maybe they don't even graduate. This happens. And that is not really an acceptable model. So we're moving right now in mutation, and everyone is experiencing this nationwide, to a model that is using a different distribution network. It's using the network, where the network can go from one node to any other node at any time. And that's creating some eye-opening alterations. So one of the places we think it's all going, well, probably the place it's going, is that we're going to be looking at way more asynchronous learning with intentional premium use of human teaching. Like, we really use teachers for what they're very best at, which is figuring out what kids aren't figuring out and helping them get through the materials they need to get through, fixing them, not necessarily always lecturing. So this distributed service model may also use what we call the extraliminal network organization, which is outside chatbots, outside teaching for a number of maybe extracurricular or extra credit classes. You don't have the teachers to offer internally, so you just use this network out here in the ether of the internet to deliver internally. So invisibly, it still looks like you're the same organization. And then this whole idea of algorithmic live teaching intersection, rather than always in front, the teacher is used at a premium. So that's where we think the organizing principle is moving away from pyramidal to network-based. So we played this game. Some of you on the call might remember this. Hybrid logistics when we were on the road. I don't know if we really got to play it in the Northeast, but we did play it in Dallas when we were there for our national gathering. And this is basically sort of a microcosm of the model of the future. And that is, this was a game. It looks like a twister board in the middle. Those are subjects with step 1 of that subject for that grade or whatever it is that you're on, step 2, step 3, step 4. What we did is we gave everybody a different role. Some people were students, some were teachers, some were what we call the activity leaders. And what happened during the game is every 30 seconds we would shout out, okay, move, right? And people would go to their next step. And the steps would be showing them, okay, now you studied this, now you're supposed to move after 3 turns to the classroom because there's a lecture that's been triggered and the teacher's going to meet you there. So you would watch as this game progressed, kids swooping out and then swooping back into the homeroom. It was all very like a dance. People loved playing it. It's very different model than they've ever seen before. That game is available, by the way, online if you need it, so you can play it yourselves. So essentially what we're saying is that we're moving from the teacher-centric models to a student-centric model. That's actually what technology allows to happen, is that every student gets what they need. So the more that you think about that is, how am I really using technology, not just as a nifty tool that's nice for teachers, but as a tool that restructures my execution model so that every student necessarily gets what they need. That's the real shift. So moving away from that grade and class structure to a course structure is sort of the center pin of it all. And a much higher percentage of asynchronous with premium synchronous, that really is a social emotional sort of gathering, and you really learn and you're really together, and maybe you come prepared now with questions rather than just sort of roll into the classroom half awake, and if the teacher calls on you, you might mutter something, right? Full digital transition unburdens the teachers from having to do every single thing for every student. That's a principle of this. And then individualized based on pace, not necessarily competency. You're going to hear a lot of schools and districts talk about competency-based learning. This is very hard to do at scale for really large schools, but based on pace is not really hard to do. And it's scalable. So it leverages the human qualities of precision teaching. So if you look at this little graphic here, here's the teacher as the bottleneck of this massive pile of work that they have to do. This is where teacher overwhelm is really coming from. All the stuff they have to do, including things that maybe just don't make sense anymore. Like, why are they doing the data entry and filing and all of the discipline and things like that, and all the targeting for every single student? Maybe you do need teaching teams. Maybe there's people behind you helping you with all this stuff, to a student-centric model that's much more flexible. So here's one of the cruxes of why this has never been done. People always ask me this. They're like, okay, well, that's really nice, and I like what you're saying and everything, but it's too hard. I can't do it because I'm stuck in these old ways of always doing things this way. And one of those ways is we have standards, academic standards and frameworks. And what we do as a district, or even as an individual school, if we're not very big, we plot those. We say, these 3 standards in math, teach them week 1.5. And then these 4, we need you to put them on those 3 weeks. So then the teacher has to build their lesson plan. So here's what a teacher's doing is they're looking at the plots, which are Google Docs, spreadsheets, PDFs. And they're like, what standard? Okay, those 3, and then this one, and then I'm teaching this one over here too. And I can't forget my other standards about digital literacy. And then I look at my schedule and whoa, here's my schedule. I got what hour on what day? Oh, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 in the morning, Tuesdays, and then one next week, Monday, Thursday, and then I'm off Friday, and I got to figure out when I'm going to do blah, blah. This is very hard on teachers. So they're looking at that, flat documents, and they're looking over at their schedule, and then they're looking at their lesson plan, and they're saying, okay, I got to triangulate these 3 things. Now what am I going to do? Plot, 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 right? Hard on teachers. So they create what is essentially a duplicative effort, altered only for time and space, all across the nation. This is a massive inefficiency, and it for basically all teachers teaching every subject and all their distribution. So where we think hybrid learning is going is that schools, and more have been telling us this in the past year, they're actually going beyond plotting of academic standards to pre-building much more of the lesson plan, quote unquote, pathway, which is taking plots of when to teach what standards. You know how most schools always have instructions around them? Now they're going like, we're beyond instructions, use this, use this, use this, and this is the what sequence we want you to teach it in. In other words, they're building normalized pathways, which is, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 about math in 6th grade. So let's say, for an example, and D on the slide, just an example lesson, very short one. Step 1 is read or do this adaptive digital curriculum module. Now build a paper model, hands-on practice, turn it into the teacher. Okay, step 3 is, there's a live lecture. You're going to have to go to a class, or you're going to video into the class. And so that's a preset intersection. Here's what the teacher would have done in the system, or the district or school would have done in the system, is they would have preset that moment to say, once 20 kids arrive at this moment in the cohort, then we trigger automatically the lecture. The next one to arrive is in the follow-on cohort. So they're put on wait. And in their waiting, they have other things to study, or they skip over to another subject. That's truly asynchronous versus synchronous learning in the future. That's the Uberization. So now this lecture has been triggered, and maybe 19 of the 20 kids actually make it, either via video or live. They're in there, but one of them didn't make it, so they automatically get rotated back to the next cohort. This is what I'm talking about in terms of the future of hybrid learning. It's not the only model. It's just the one that makes a lot of sense at scale, and the most competitive. So if you were to build true personalized pathways using algorithms to auto-cohort, auto-distribute resources, and auto-calendar, it might look something like this, where you start as a student, you're pre-reading at the bottom of this slide, you're studying for a social studies lecture, and then your very next step is lecture, and it's a red light. Your cohort is not full, skip to a different study sequence. So you're over here on the side of the slide, on the right side, you're skipping over to another subject while the clock is running. Oh, the cohort's full now. You get a pop-up notification, and it says, you've been calendared for lecture room 1B. If you're on campus, go there in about 5 minutes. If you're off campus, here's the link for Zoom. So everyone arrives. It's a fantastic, whole group activity. And then you're back in your homeroom. And now you're on to science, and you're doing some virtual reality. And then the next thing you did is a math proof and paper, and then there's some test on something, and you're auto-routed to the very next thing. It's a totally different way to route students and learning and use human intersection properly. So the way it would look would be hybrid logistics would have some personalized learning paths. Notice how the kid in the blue t-shirt is coming in from home. The little girl on the very far left is routed through a routing sheet of check 1, check 2. She now has to go to the classroom. Then she actually goes to a robotics lab. Other kids are sort of maneuvering through other places. It looks like chaos. I visited one of these schools in Southern California in Santa Ana, and the superintendent warned me before he took me into one of the classrooms. He said, this is going to look like chaos to you. And it was. Kids were laying around beanbags with their iPads up in the air doing their reading, and other kids were doing some sort of activity on a table, and the teacher was over in the corner with one kid helping them on something they didn't get, and some kids were at the board. It looked like chaos, but it was actually controlled chaos. Kids were at different points. This is essential to grasp, as one of the most inequitable things we've always had in learning is the whole groupification of everything. It's not really an equitable model. So if you look at what does this mean for teachers and schools, obviously we've already been in the biggest change moment ever on record. And I'm talking about even more change, but it's also a survival idea. How are we going to truly have models that compete with the homeschool opt-out movement, that allow true personalization of pace and space and the flexibility of time? How do we do that? The older models we come from don't really allow for that. It's very messy to try. And just talking to so many superintendents and other administrators in the last year, it's very obvious that the planning part of this whole thing in the last year has just sort of blown minds, and it's not really working. So where we're doing some beta testing of the hybrid logistics model is in nostory.com. If you haven't heard of it, you should join, with a multi-level calendar for segmenting programs, daily rotations, daily blocks. This is a whole secret sauce. which we're hoping to also have integrate to all the LMSs and apps and places like Safari Montage, so that it's easy to sort of do the logistics part without scrapping everything else you already have. If you haven't been an Edu Jedi yet, you should join. The courses are fantastic. They're teaching you a lot of these concepts. What are the barriers? What are the sacrifices? What are the bonuses? What you should keep, your people, how you can elevate your people, make them, there's a whole social emotional discussion about what's happening with teachers and administrators right now that's really important. So this has been the hybrid logistics conversation for you. And I'm just checking my time. I think I'm almost at time. Yeah, we got 5 minutes. All right. So calling on you guys, ask me questions about this. What do you think about it? And, kind of where are you coming from? Because this has been sort of a wild ride, I'm sure, for you to listen to. And if you want examples, I can share some more. Okay, I'm being the teacher that just says, ask me a question. This is what happens in every classroom, by the way. Kids are on mute and they don't necessarily come off mute and nobody asks any questions. So you have to keep prompting them. What are you doing with hybrid logistics? Are you just doing it in classroom, or are you looking at it institution-wide? Hi, Teresa. Okay, good. You're excited about the Edu Jedi webinar. Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do a lot more with Edu Jedi this year. In fact, just so everyone knows on the call, if you haven't joined Edu Jedi, please do, because it's a series of learning working meetings on the dictionary. And if you haven't seen the dictionary yet, I should show it to you really quickly. Dragging that screen over so you can see it. If the screen will let me. Well, it's not going to let me. So let me see if I can get that over there. Okay, maybe now I can. Nope. I'm sure people have also experienced this themselves, where they can't share when they want to share. Yeah, so the Edu Jedi are doing some really interesting things right now with the dictionary, the whole digital learning experience standards, and there will be working meetings on all of those things. Carrie brought up something where I think should be a new standard in there that the team should add. If you want to be on those working committees, those meetings, you have to let us know by joining, because essentially you come and you're given a document and you work through it and you learn from it, and then you add to it or make comments. And then that becomes the next published version of the dictionary. So there you go. I don't think we have any questions right now, but I'm looking for you guys to ask me, if you want to ask me any questions, please do.